Welcome to Delivered. Welcome back. And today we have Laura Weldon from Studio LWD. We'll be diving into the importance of brand strategy, brand communication, and just how it really can enable businesses to leverage the right brand strategy to talk to their audience and build meaningful connections to help build their companies. So without further ado, let's talk to the expert, get talking to Laura. Hi Laura, welcome to Delivered.
Hi, nice to have you. Nice to be here, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks. I'm very well. I'm very excited about this conversation purely because A, I love talking about strategy, of course, very biased. And secondly, just because I get to talk to someone from my part of the world in the UK, the northern Blackpool area. So it's a nice feeling. So yes, welcome on board.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks.
And I thought, first and foremost, we should probably just talk about brands, right? You know, brand is your game, brand is important. And, you know, what does brand represent? And what are those things that brands can bring to a company, big or small?
Well, for me and for all of our clients when I speak to them is that it's kind of brand is the foundation of your business. You know, it's really integral to everything you do as a business. If you want to grow, if you're starting up, it needs to be that foundation of everything going forward. So, you know, what is your brand essence? What do you stand for? What are your values? Who's your audience? Why are people going to buy into you and believe in your brand and your business? So, yeah, again, I'm probably biased also, but for me, it's like the number one most important thing that you need to get nailed, either for a startup or for a business that wants to grow. It's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you kind of fit into that world? So I've looked obviously at the Studio LWD websites, and I know your background briefly, but for the listeners at home, let's talk a bit about you and your business.
Yeah, so we've just celebrated our 10-year anniversary, so a big week for us this week. So we are a full-service creative agency specialising in obviously brand and brand strategy. And what we really focus on is how we can align strategy with crafted design. I think sometimes, you know, there can be the tendency to focus very much on the visual side of things and the fun and the pretty part, but without the strategy and the thinking and the understanding behind it, it can fall down. So we really focus on bringing those two elements together to look at bringing a return on investment, you know, for the businesses that are investing into the brand.
Yeah, that's great. And I think really what resonates with me on that conversation is, you know, at Infinite we do a lot of strategy around business, and it could be innovation strategy, it could be, you know, design strategy, it could be anything around validation of an idea or a product. And I feel like it all shares the same concept where like strategy, it might not be everything, but it's in everything. And I think also the idea that you're saying is with brand strategies, like it's almost the first glimmer of an idea to what the company wants to become, like an aspiration almost. And I feel like a lot of people look at that and go, yes, it is things like, you know, colours and fonts and logos in a very primitive sense, but obviously there's so much more to that. Maybe we can lean into that conversation a bit more about what brand brings to a company.
Yeah, well, for me, it's all about giving the company focus. You know, I think especially like if you're starting out, if you're wanting to grow, you know, the tendency is that we want to be all things to all people. And ultimately, you know, we want to generate sales or generate revenue and get money in the bank, which is, you know, it's understandable with businesses. But without that hyper focus that strategy brings, you tend to be kind of scrabbling around and, you know, oh, we'll try a bit of this or try a bit of that. So for me, it is giving that real clarity and focus to the business. So, you know, it's mapping out at that day one of, you know, who do you want to be? What do you want to stand for? And who are you speaking to? You know, even if you only do those three things, if you think I can't do anything else but do those three things, it'll give you that real clarity in the business. You know, if you don't know who you're speaking to, you don't know how to speak to them. So it starts to unpick lots of different avenues for you to go down. And like you say, there's all different types of strategy. But this kind of runs, it's like a thread that runs through everything. So if you've got the brand strategy nailed, that can then run through to your innovation strategy or your product strategy or, you know, your digital marketing strategy. But this becomes that kind of thread that weaves through everything then for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And is there any areas that you think people would not be conscious of as like it's part of a brand strategy? Because in my mind, I think people always lean to like the visual stuff, and you always think, okay, if I'm doing a brand strategy, it's just about visual, you know.
Yeah.
But obviously there's much more to that. And again, from my inside track knowledge of doing strategy for people, I understand there's more to it than that. Maybe let's just like delve a layer in beyond the visual. Like, what else could it bring to a company?
Yeah, well, for us, when we're starting these sort of projects, we always start with strategy. We don't do any visuals. So for us, the visuals are completely off the table. And sometimes people find that a bit uncomfortable because, like you say, the colours and the fonts, that's the fun bit, that's the exciting bit.
Yeah.
But it's taking that off the table. So it's looking at, what's your positioning in the marketplace? What do you want to stand for as a business? Why are people going to believe in you? More and more we're seeing, especially with B Corp and these other things that businesses are going for. People really want to believe and buy into brands. They don't just, they want to understand why they're buying into them or feel that they're part of something.
Yeah.
So making sure that that's really clear is super key. And that's how you're going to then build this kind of dedicated brand loyal audience that will repeat buy, that are going to shout your name from the rooftops and be like, oh my God, buy into this brand, it's amazing. So it's about generating that loyalty from day one, and that for me is more about attitudes and behaviors as opposed to it's a blue logo with a sans serif font. That is just like that. I always say it's like building a house. So that is kind of the furnishing of the house, and the strategy is the actual building of the house. And that's going to be the thing that stands the test of time, as opposed to just kind of enticing visuals. And I think that's really important as well, because with the rise of things like Canva and other things that people can do themselves, it's, if you look on Instagram now or, any other social channels, you'll start to see a sea of things that all look the same. Brands are starting to all look the same. And that's because there's no real strategy behind it. They don't really understand what they're trying to do. So then it becomes well, that looks good. Let's try a bit of that. There's no purpose there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes me think about, we couldn't have a talk about anything brand-based without talking about the golden circle, right? The classic Simon Sinek, how, what, and why. I can't imagine how many times you've had to run that exercise. I've done that quite a few myself. And I think you're right. I mean, looking at like what you're saying there, and what we do, I guess from the influence point of view, where we have kind of like a process of analysing the business, doing the market research, doing the validation of a product or idea, then building like a solution and blueprint. I'd almost imagine brand or branding strategy would sit at every phase of that, essentially, where you would always have the brand goals, the brand's narrative, like wrapped into it. And I think that's a really good learning from my point of view already.
Yeah, well, that for me, that should always, when you're doing those pieces, it should always be coming back to that brand. So it should be, if you're then building out your kind of product strategy, it then needs to be almost sense checked by the brand strategy. So, okay, this is the product strategy, but is it hitting? Is it aligning with the brand values of who we are? Is it aligning with our brand manifesto and our essence? And ultimately, is it going to appeal to our target audience that we've mapped out in the brand strategy? So I always say that's kind of like it's like the checklist. It makes it sound really unsexy, but it is. It's like the checklist to say, if it doesn't meet these criteria that's laid out in the brand guidelines, then it's not right. It's, it needs to be tweaked to make it work.
Yeah.
So it becomes that kind of hyper focus and guiding light for you to help you. And then it should make those other strategy pieces like the innovation and product, it should ultimately make that slightly easier to do, because you're not starting with a blank piece of paper every single time.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think sometimes you have to, I wish everything was, quote unquote sexy that you do, but I do think sometimes like what we are here to do is de-risk companies. And again, that's an equally unsexy word, but when I'm talking about strategy to people, it is that. It's like, yes, you can go and do anything, but the margin of error is going to be significant. If you follow a process, i.e. a strategy of any magnitude, especially one that's layered with multiple strategies, you're going to just bring that risk down and hedge your bets in a much more positive way. So I totally prescribe to that mindset. And I think also, in terms of branding as a principle, I imagine as well that you could, debate that it's useful externally to talk to the right people in the right way, but equally it's probably as powerful internally inside a company, right? In fostering a culture that they want to,
Yeah, I would say we've seen a massive shift in this over the years, especially since the pandemic. And I would say probably, if you asked me this question 5 years ago, I'd say it's probably like 20% internal, 80% external, kind of the weighting of how important it is. I would say it's pretty much getting to that 50-50 mark now. We're building the teams that we're a lot more open to remote working, hybrid working. People have got staff all over the world now. They're not all just sat in a little office together. So how do you build that team culture? How do you get that buy-in where, again, everyone is kind of living and breathing your brand? Because if the internal staff aren't living and breathing the brand, how is that then being communicated externally? Yeah. So for me, I'd say it's just as important, because if your team aren't living and breathing it, then you're definitely not going to be communicating it properly. So it's really important of how you can build that employee culture. And that's not to say, we're going to put brand guidelines in super graphics on a big wall so everyone can read there every day. Yeah. I'm sure people have all been in offices like that, or as a poster on the wall. There's more engaging ways in which you can do it. But again, it comes back to that foundation of who we are, what do we stand for, and what do we want our team to believe in, so it's not always about target audience. So what we started doing now is, when we're mapping out the target audience, one of the audiences is internal. So we will map that out as, how does this work internally? How do we engage the team internally? What do we need to do with them? And we also map that out as a separate piece as well. I tend to find that gets missed a little bit, and we just focus too much on the external. Whereas I personally think it's as important to have both boxed off, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just thinking about my visits to consultancies in the past, the big fives, and it's like, first thing you see when you get off those lifts is that brand statement smack bang in the lobby. Not that's right or wrong, it's just that, it's observation. No. But, and I guess what's interesting to me as well is, like you're saying, since post-COVID, since, the world is now even more digital, if you are, for example, let's just say a small to medium-sized business, you have a presence of sorts online. It's not very pointed, but it's there. You have some customer base. How would you then position a brand or start a brand, call it a facelift, so something like that, something that's just kind of, it's in the market, it has something there, but it doesn't have any narrative. How does that resonate? And I'm thinking more about products here. When we talk about products, we're always looking at the user stories and the user, journey maps. We can't position a story for that user. But I guess with a company, the brand story and the brand strategy is that facelift they need to kind of externalize their dreams and visions. So how would you start that?
Yeah, well, we always look at it, so like you said there, it's a product, but the business is the product. So the brand is the product, as almost as you're looking at it, as the whole thing wrapped up is a product in itself. And again, we just bring it back to, we tend to find, like I said, the established companies that need that facelift or need that refresh. You would presume that you go, okay, that you've got the strategy. Let's see strategy. Let's see guidelines. Let's see what's going on. Let's do a bit of an audit, and then we can see where the holes are. I would say 75% of the time, they've still not got a strategy. So even these big guys don't have one, and they're like, "Oh, what strategy? We don't have it." So it's about looking at that. If you do have a strategy as well, we always say you need to be re-looking at it probably 18 months to 2 years. What is working now? The world's changing, and as we all know, it's changing at such a rapid pace. Year on year, it seems to change quicker and quicker and quicker. So we need to make sure that we are, going back, checking it. So I think people tend to think that once it's done, and it's filed on a server, and it's a nice little book of guidelines, and it's like, we've done it, tick, that job's done. But you need to be living and breathing it, and it's something organic that needs you need to grow with it, and it also needs to grow with you. So it's kind of a two-way approach, I think, really, is making sure that it grows together, I think is the best way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I really like that idea, because we have this, I guess, our brand strategy and brand narrative has the statement "never stop," infinitum, etc. And I think that is a really pointed thing that you're right. Nothing actually is ever done or ever perfect, and businesses and products continually. So for me, it's like that's really, really important for people to understand. And you're right. A lot of times I'm talking to clients about how to build strategies or just build an idea of a plan, and I think that education piece is really where I think the first hurdle starts. It's like, okay, let's come together and figure out what we're doing and why. But actually, let's just first start with what's the point of doing any of this stuff in terms of the education? Because I think once you have that, you have then essentially a good filter to go, is the client the right client or not, essentially, because they either prescribe to that method or they don't, But as we know, the risk is dropped massively with a good strategic start.
but even on that, like you say, knowing if the client is potentially a good client or not, it's sometimes they don't know, so it's taking them on that journey. And we've had so many clients at the beginning that have been really hesitant and been like, oh, this isn't for us, just do as a logo. And I'm like, it doesn't really work like that in 2023. So sometimes it's also about educating the client and bringing them on that journey with you, because some people just don't know what they need to do. You know, if you're like me, someone asking me to go and fix a car, I don't know how to do it. You know, this is our skill set. So sometimes it's about educating the client as well, and that's something that we do a lot here, is that we kind of bring the client on the journey with us and make sure that they're involved at all touch points. You get them, you know, it's a really collaborative process. I think the danger sometimes where we've seen projects go wrong, you know, for clients, and they've come to us and said, we've had a nightmare, this hasn't worked. And it's because the agency has worked in silo away from the client. And I think that's when the danger happens. So as long as it's being approached in a really collaborative, open discussion, I believe there's no bad clients. Maybe that's just me being rose-tinted glasses this morning. But yeah, I think it is about education and holding people's hands and taking them on that journey with them.
Yeah, and I do love that. I mean, it's one of my favourite metaphors ever when I'm talking about doing workshops and discovery. It's like, we're going on a journey together, and you rinse the metaphor of like, pick your favourite movies. It's either like a Star Wars thing or Lord of the Rings. There's a guide, there's the heroes. I think that's so true, and I think I do love the optimism actually. In fact, it's really infectious, because I do feel like, yeah, you're right, maybe there is no bad clients. It's just a process that maybe isn't so great that then discourages them to join the journey or the right journey.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so I guess, like you say, strategy is one thing, education is the other, but together, that's where the magic happens. I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, it really is just that open dialogue and communication, and also making clients. We get feedback before, and clients have come to us and said, you know, we've worked with other agencies, they've made us feel stupid. And I always am like, I think it's about having that open dialogue where they feel they can ask a question. You know, we live and breathe this every day, don't we? We might use terminology that is alien to people if it's not their day-to-day, you know, it's not their day-to-day role. So I think again, it sounds really cheesy, but it's like making it a safe space that you can just say, I'm not sure what that is that okay? And you can have those open conversations. I think that's so important for us as well, is making sure that they feel heard and involved and part of the process.
Yeah, and it's interesting drawing the parallel there, because I think it is a part of it is like coaching unofficially when you're talking with clients, but I think equally on the brand side of things, it's almost a similar journey for their clients and customers. It's like you probably need to communicate clearly, like, yes, what you're about, but equally the education of what you're selling and why you're selling it as well. So it is a kind of a dual track education, I suppose. The more getting like a bit of a light bulb moment. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. So just to dial into like, I'll lean into the product world a bit more, just to be a little bit more, Infinim-centric for a second. So with a brand strategy, you have a brand strategy, and that's great. They know where to go, and there's a guide there. How would that essentially affect things like features and functions and the technical things that would create a product, for example? Like, do they have a parallel or not?
I believe they do. So if it was something like, say, you're mapping out that features and functionality of a product, part of the brand strategy is the audience. So for me, it would be starting with that audience. If you're mapping out a product for children, say, the functionality of that is going to be very different to, say, if there's an elderly generation that are not tech savvy. So again, you would know all this in the strategy. This would be mapped out of who they are, what age are they, what do they do, what are the likes, dislikes. So you would use that as a basis then of kind of going, okay, well, this is the basis of who they are. So we've already got that information from the strategy. And then we'd also look at kind of the brand personality and the brand tone of voice. So from a functionality point of view, or, even messaging in the product and the way that we're like conveying things. Yeah. Okay, so we know the brand personality is, say, fun and energetic and engaging. So we'll maybe make some of the functionality represent that, or it's really professional. So again, so there's things that you can bring in from the brand strategy, such as the tone of voice, guidelines, audience, overall essence of the brand that would then help influence the product as well. Like I say, that's almost like it's like a starter for 10 that you can kind of bring that information out of the guideline, at the strategy, to then start to build the blocks for the product strategy.
Yeah, I love that. And I guess really the ultimate goal here is, and it's the dreaded moment of truth when all this like lines up, it's the launch day of a particular brand, product, business, whatever. I guess for me, the brand part of that has to be so baked, integrated into the product and business at that stage. So when they go live,
Yeah.
maybe we could talk a little bit about experience on that front as well, launching these things, products, businesses, etc.
Yeah, I think for me, is that I think people get really bogged down with launch on everything has to be perfect. It's got to be absolutely spot on.
Yeah.
I don't think we've ever launched anything perfectly, so I don't know if that's a bad advertisement for us, but things will never be perfect, and you need to launch it, test it, refine, and go again. We can't. It's never going to be perfect, and I think sometimes we work with clients and they've delayed and delayed because it's like, oh, this isn't quite right. I always think as long as it's pretty much there, and we're solid with the brand, it's cohesive, it's consistent. Consistency for me is something I bang on about all the time. It's probably the most boring word ever. But you have to be consistent. People are looking at, buying a product off you or downloading a digital product. Is the consistent touch points across all your channels, across your email marketing? How are we building this consistent brand journey for people throughout product and then brand, marketing and things like this? So my advice would always be, don't try and get too bogged down on the launch. It becomes, for the people involved, it's almost like D-Day, and the world's going to change when this happens.
Yeah.
And you almost press that button and it's like anticlimax. Oh, okay. It's still a Monday afternoon, and So I think the danger is the only issue I see is that then once it's launched is then people just leave things. That is like the worst thing that you could do. So like I said, with strategy, with the product, with product strategy, anything is once it's done, you don't just tick that box and say, we've done that job, let's do something else.
Yeah.
You need to keep sense checking, you need to be looking at the data, what's working, what's not working, how can we constantly make this better to strive to deliver a better product or a better service or brand.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a couple of points there that sort of made me smile from history of doing these things. You're right, like that D-Day thing is massive. And the funny thing is when you launch stuff, usually no one cares in the world more about this launch, whatever it is, more than you, because it's your thing. But like you say, for everyone else, it's like it's just a thing happening somewhere in the ether. But yeah, we have this statement in the kind of workshops that we run. It's like, it's better to start than make it perfect. Because I think that's the hardest thing, like just getting going. And then, like you're saying, layering in consistency after that to keep that momentum up and the right process and the right, everything to go with it. So I think, you're right completely on that front. And I guess also just to touch on this and get more context, do you have any stories of, I guess, your company, for example, transforming a business with branding? You're transforming in, the lightest term, I appreciate it's a massive word, but you know what I'm saying, you've rolled it in and it's made a significant difference to them as a company.
Yeah, so, gosh, I've done so many. I can't think.
See, good advertising.
How egotistical is that answer? No, I think there's a couple that stand out. So there's one a company we worked with, and they were really small. They wanted to kind of grow, and they had a great management team in place, and there was about 20 of them. They've since grown to about 250 staff, and for us, the great thing with them was that they really bought into what we were doing, and they didn't quite understand it. It was massively out of their comfort zone. They worked in manufacturing. You couldn't have got more polar opposite of what we do and what they do. But they were willing to go on the journey. They were willing to be educated and learn. And they also are willing to kind of keep finessing and refining. So we tend to find the ones that don't always work the best is once it's done, is that they are almost like, especially with us, like, thanks guys, you've done your bit. And the ones where we can build that lasting partnership and lasting relationship, that does really, really help, because we can all work together and bring the best minds to the table.
Sure.
to help kind of, and again, it helps with that return on investment. But yeah, it is about getting that kind of the ones that work the best is when it is that buy-in, that we're all together working to the same page. We might not all understand everyone's bits, but as long as we're working together. And that's also not just for the client, but for collaborating with other agencies as well. So we'll do our bit. There might be a digital agency that comes in. There might be guys like yourself that are coming in to run the product side of it and the innovation side of it. And for me, again, it's making sure that everyone is collaborating and having those open conversations to do the best for that, end product, end brand, whatever the end result is, all working towards that as one common goal. And we can sometimes see in the past that that's not always the case. I don't know if you've had that, but there is that danger sometimes when other agencies are coming in, it's that collaboration, it can either be amazing or it can be butting of heads. So for us, it's all about working together for that common end goal, really.
I love that beautiful message. It's about collaboration, right? I mean, it's so true though. And answer your question, yes. Like I've had a lot of experience where there's been an agency, there's been a horror story, there's been a thing, or you're on a project and another agency's coming in, and there's this kind of like awkwardness between it because you're both agencies, and it's like, well, why are we doing all the work,
Yeah, Mexican standoff.
Absolutely, yeah. But you're right in terms of taking the branding strategy principles. It's like, okay, what you're really good at is your target audience, and they might be an agency in another sense, but they're not. They're different. They have different, audience and different skill sets. So. Yeah, I mean, you're right. I think if collaboration is key, is the beautiful message we get out of all of this. I think that's something I'll take away. And I guess just as just riding high on that message, is there any kind of advice you would just give, either it's an early stage, in fact, it could be any shape or size, right? Like you say, it doesn't matter where they are in their journey. Is there just some initial words of wisdom from your experience you would just bestow upon companies to say, okay, this is what you should be doing if you want to get your branding stuff in order?
Yeah. Oh, I say give us a call first. I think it's sitting down with your team and seeing if you can carve out a budget for this. I think these sort of things is something that people tend to think they can do themselves. Like I said, to think like a Canva and stuff like that. It's very much like this kind of DIY sort of, which is fine for the visual side of it. But I think the strategy side of it, definitely invest in an expert if you can. If not, get on YouTube and watch as many videos, read as many books, kind of the Brand Gap, Start with Why. There's all the books that we kind of speak about, is try and educate yourself on it if you can't, and if you can't afford to invest in an expert. But yeah, I think it is really about kind of having that expert touch. And even if you going and seeing speakers, going to events that do these things, and just trying to gain as much advice and knowledge as you can yourself. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Another key thing, if you are trying to do it yourself, is research. Again, boring. I love research. It's the cornerstone of everything we do.
Me too, actually.
Yeah, you can do your research, understand the market you're going into, or understand the market you're currently in. What are your competitors doing? What are who are your audience? What are they buying into? Where are they spending all their money? How can you get some of that for them to spend on your business or product? So really nail that research. That is something that you can do yourself with your team internally. But all this information and data should start to then help you build up a picture of what you need to be doing. And then, Lisa, if you've got that would then help you to go to an agency and say, we've got this as a start of 10. This is what we're trying to do. Yeah. If you are struggling with, making that investment.
Absolutely. It's very well said. And I think it's actually a perfect segue for, we have some questions from various viewers who have companies, they have challenges, and who better than Laura Weldon to answer these questions. So I was going to read you a couple of these out and then see where it lands. So Luca has asked, I have a SaaS business. It's just starting out. We're at MVP stage. We have a product. We have a potential investment coming up. We've never done anything on branding, and we have an idea who we want to target. It's going to be a dating app, which also has stigma attached to dating apps. Yeah. Where do we even begin to carve out our plan for this product, at a branding level?
Yeah. Okay. So, did you say Luca? Yeah, Luca. Hi, Luca. I would say just what we're saying there. So research. First thing, do your research. Go on. Look at all the other products that are in this market. What are they doing? What does start with the top easy things. What does the brand look like? What's the messaging? How are they speaking? What type of personality have they got? Who are they aiming themselves at? Who is their audience? And then do you want to slot into that? Do you want to be a challenger brand? Do you want to be a disruptor brand? What is your kind of route into the market? Are you coming in to kind of go, those dating apps have all got it wrong and we're going to get it right? What is your message? What is your hook? I would always say that would easily be your start for 10, and then see where you want to sit in that marketplace. So where are you sitting around everyone else? And what do you want to stand for? I think that's the some quick wins that you'd be able to do yourself, and then really start nailing down and drilling down into the details of the audience and who they are, what do they like. And the danger is people always just look at the market that you're going into, but also look at that kind of periphery market. So, you are competing for, people to buy your product or sign up to your product. What other things are you competing against? So is it lifestyle products or, food or anything? What other things? So don't just look at your market, look at the wider market as well.
I think that's a really great bit of advice, and hopefully that is something that powers Luca's business, I have to say. And I think I have one more question from another Laura, actually. It's not you, is it? No.
Yeah.
So Laura says, I have an international business which is basically around painting and paints and textiles. It's like a chemical business. It's a very old business. The brand has not been touched for at least 20 years, give or take, and it's time to bring it into the new 21st century look and feel to kind of give them a better look and a better, I guess, modern approach. Where would a business that's already been around for a long time, start in that case?
Oh, that's a really interesting one. And I was just reading last week about the Johnson & Johnson rebrand. I don't know if you've seen that, but they've changed their logo. So that was like a big thing where there's this heritage logo that's been for hundreds of years and they've changed it. So my thing on that would always be, don't change anything that's not broken. So don't have a knee-jerk reaction of, it's 20, do you say 20 years old, Chris? It's like, 20,
Around, yeah.
however years old, and we therefore need to look modern and funky. I think it's, again, bringing it back a step. So don't think about the visuals. Map out the audience. So is then what you've got visually going to appeal to that audience? Are you looking at going into new audiences? So you're trying to get maybe a younger demographic involved. Definitely do some market research as well. You've been going for so long. Speak to current customers, clients. What do they like? What do they not like? And again, start to build that picture. And then it might be that it's just a slight brand refresh where, you might keep the logo as it is, but then we're just bringing in some nice colours and photography and making it a little bit more modern. Or it might be that everything gets thrown out the window and we're starting again. Take it away from the visual for now and do that research up front. So who is your audience? What kind of markets are you going into? Is it new markets? And then start to build a picture from there. But we do see this a lot where people almost get bored of the brand. We've had it for 10 years or whatever. Fed up of seeing it. I'm fed up of seeing it on my email footer every single day for the last 10 years. So make sure you're speaking to your customers as well. And also, if you are going into new markets or to new customers, speak to potential new customers as well. How can you speak to these people? So if you are saying going into a younger market, can you market test your current brand with them? Say, what do you think of this? What does this make you think or feel? So it is a decision grounded in kind of fact and data rather than something emotional and subjective that is, I just don't like this anymore.
Yeah. I think that's really good advice, and I think that, again, hopefully empowers the other Laura to go off and make changes to her business and to make a positive change. So I guess that's really it, Laura. I'm going to wrap it there because I'm conscious of your time. I know you're a super busy person, and thank you again for the time. It's been beautiful to have a good conversation about strategy as always. And where can people find you online, etc., for your world and what you do?
So you can go on our website, which is studiolwd.co.uk, or you can find us on Instagram, or you can find me on LinkedIn. So Laura Weldon, on there every day on LinkedIn. So if you want any gems or knowledge for branding, we share lots of helpful information on there. So feel free to give me a follow.
That's great. Laura, thanks again. Well, folks, that was a great episode for me. I took so much away from that. Communication is key. Get yourself a strategy. It makes complete sense. It's an investment in your business and your brand and your product. And yeah, I can only thank again Laura for her time. And if you want to check out any more information on Delivered, you can go to infinum.com/delivered, where you'll find all our past episodes and upcoming new episodes and a picture of me smiling. So thanks again. You've been great. Take care. Bye-bye.